Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this is part of the good stuff. This is the AAS Journal Scientific Editor Series. And I'm very happy to have scientific editor Alan Shafter with us today. Hi, Alan.
Hi, how are you doing, Frank?
I am doing well on this one day after solstice. But you know, I did get out and I took a look at the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn yesterday.
That was the minimum separation yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll still be close, of course, today, but you know, you got to catch it on the closest day. But it was pretty cool. You know, at first it looked like a unresolved binary because it was kind of fuzzy.
I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I came back from a walk yesterday, the neighbor asked me about this event that was happening tonight, and I said, "What event?" Oh yeah, that event.
That one, yeah, okay. Yeah, because I had done an interview with a Sky and Telescope author, and of course they know that stuff
Right.
super well. So that was good. Alan, what's your geolocation?
Well, I'm actually in Idlewild. We have a cabin up here. It's a mountain community about 2 hours northeast of San Diego.
Okay.
So I'm up here to kind of hang out, especially during the COVID times. It's a great place to sort of isolate, so we spend a lot of time up here.
Oh, I was gonna say, because that's an awesome fire you've got going behind you.
Yeah, we've got chilly Southern California weather, maybe in the high 50s outside. Brr. So got to get that fire going.
Brr. I'm sure our colleagues at more northern latitudes are hitting you. Yeah, it hit 70F here in Phoenix today. Still blue sky. So yeah, very mild winter as usual. That's why people winter bird in Phoenix.
Exactly.
So very cool. So Alan, what do you like to do for research?
Well, I've spent most of my career working on cataclysmic variable stars. So novae in particular. So I study novae in the galaxy and also novae in nearby galaxies. Mm-hmm. I guess the theme of my research over the years has been to try to understand how the properties of novae, the peak luminosities and fade rates, vary with stellar population. So that's kind of difficult to do in the galaxy because most of the novae are disk objects. There's a few in the bulge and so on, but extinction makes that difficult. So we study nearby galaxies, either galaxies of different Hubble types, or in the case of a nearby spiral where you can resolve it like M31, we try to separate the bulge and disk components and do that. So that's what I spent most of my time working on over the past 20 years or so.
Cool. My introduction to CVs was a class I took as a graduate student with Bob Kraft.
Oh.
That's where I first learned my CV.
Back in the 60s was the guy who really put the nail in the coffin on determining that they're all close binary systems.
Yeah, Bob was a monster in that. So I'm always curious a little bit how people get into the fields they do, given that there's so many fields one could possibly choose. So how did you get into this field?
Well, it was kind of by accident, actually. I was a grad student at UCLA.
Okay.
And I went on a observing run up at Lick with Dan Popper. Okay. I wasn't working with him, but he made opportunities for students to go up there. So I went up there and he was studying, just detached binary systems, determining masses and so on. And I thought, that was a little bit interesting, but not that interesting, doing detached systems. And so I started researching different kinds of binary stars. And I came across cataclysmic variables, cataclysmic binaries, where things changed on human timescales. And you could go to the observatory and you wouldn't know if this dwarf nova was going to be an eruption or a nova would go off or something like that. And the orbital periods were typically less than 10 hours. Mm-hmm. So you could get an entire radial velocity curve in a few night observing run and so on. So that really appealed to me. Cool. And unfortunately, there was nobody at UCLA really that worked on interacting binaries. Well, there's Mirek Plavik was there, but he didn't really work on cataclysmic variables. So as it turned out, when I first arrived at UCLA, I was hired as a research assistant by Roger Ulrich.
Okay.
He was doing solar oscillation. So I was doing that, for the money.
Oh,
Doing that to support myself.
got it.
And I wasn't that interested in that. But Roger was kind enough to support me while I did a thesis on cataclysmic variable stars.
Very cool.
So I did that and TAing. And so I didn't really have a thesis advisor when I was there. The people that I depended on were Paula Scody and Joe Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
Paula Scody visited UCLA because her husband was I think at Caltech or something at the time. And so Paula spent several quarters at UCLA, and that was really how I got involved in CVs. And Joe Patterson also came out and spent some time there. I observed with him. So I had these sort of external advisors guiding me along. And I did the thesis and graduated in '83. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I went to a meeting in January of '83. I hadn't started writing my thesis yet. And I found out about a job at McDonald Observatory at University of Texas, McDonald Fellowship. And so I decided to apply for that. So I applied for it and I got it. And then I said, I better get writing.
Now what do I do?
So I finished it up in record time and ended up at UT Austin in '83, I think it was, October of '83. And that was like I went from being in an environment where nobody studied, cataclysmic variables to like the center in the US with Rob Robinson, Ed Nather.
Yep.
Brian Warner even spent some time there when I was there. So it was kind of a hub of CVs. So I really, as a postdoc there, first as a McDonald Fellow, and then as a research scientist, I spent a total of 5.5 years there. That was really kind of my formative years in studying cataclysmic variable stars and novae, because that was, like I said, the place to do it.
Cool.
So that's how I got into it.
Very cool. Let's fast forward 20 odd years. Certainly
Wanted to add, if I can.
Yeah.
This is kind of a complicated backstory. So there was another aspect of what I'm doing now that actually had a genesis when I was at UCLA. And that is that Holland Ford and his graduate student, Robin Chardullo, who came in the same time I did. So we both started grad school at the same time. We became pretty good friends. Holland Ford was studying planetary nebulae in M31 using an image tube camera to take H-alpha images of the galaxy. And I don't know why they weren't doing 5/7, maybe they were, but they were doing H-alpha. And they found these H-alpha transient sources that they didn't really know what they were at the time.
Okay.
And so I got a little bit involved in that. We took some spectra and they turned out to be novae. And so that was really my first taste of studying novae in nearby galaxies. And then after I went to Texas, I continued that project kind of on the side, monitoring M31 and working with Robin, who had, by that time went to Space Telescope Science Institute. So really, the genesis of what I've been doing recently really did start actually when I was a graduate student.
Cool.
So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh no. The backstories are great. They're the human element of the whole thing. So let's fast forward maybe 20 odd years.
Okay.
25 years, or maybe. And there's certainly in the last several years been a lot of action in novae and CVs. So what are some of the things that you see on the horizon going forward for the field on novae? What's some of the hot topics you think we can make some progress on over the next couple of years with new telescopes like JWST coming on and others?
Okay, so from a modeling aspect, from a theoretical aspect, I think the idea of whether or not novae, the white dwarfs in nova binary systems, can actually grow in mass is an important thing.
Yes.
Because it turns out that it's possible that novae, in particular, a sort of subclass of novae called recurrent novae, that we believe have massive white dwarfs. It's possible that if they can grow in mass, that classical novae or recurrent novae can be a progenitor for type 1a supernovae. So that's an important thing.
Yes.
They can be a contributor to the single degenerate channel. From an observational standpoint, it's kind of related to that. One of the things that I'm trying to do, as I said, is study the stellar population of novae and determine nova rates in different galaxies and determine whether or not, you know, the number of novae systems that are there can contribute to a galaxy's type 1a supernova rate. And so I've been studying novae in probably 5 or 6 galaxies, and there's probably a dozen galaxies with measured nova rates. And one of the things, so we've determined that a typical galaxy has about 2 to 3 novae per year per 10 to the 10 solar luminosities in the K band. That's how we normalize it.
Okay.
But there's been some evidence recently that maybe we're underestimating that by a factor of 2 or 3. If we're missing a sort of subpopulation of novae that are very fast, their evolution, in other words, they fade quickly from maximum brightness, and they don't get very bright in the first place. So these kind of novae would be missed in most of the surveys that have gone on. There's a relationship in the study of novae called the maximum magnitude versus rate of decline relationship. You probably heard of. So what it means is that for novae, the ones that get the brightest, the most luminous, typically fade the quickest, and the ones that don't get as bright fade more slowly. So if you integrate the light curve, the total energy liberated is relatively constant among novae. So it's important that this is kind of opposite of type 1a supernovae, where the ones that get the brightest fade the slowest, right? And so that relationship is different. It gets confusing. So, but with novae, they typically fade more quickly if they're bright. But there's a class of novae that appear to violate that. They sort of lie in the lower quadrant of this luminosity versus fade rate diagram. So they don't get very bright, but they fade quickly. So that's a nightmare if you're trying to find these systems. We know of at least one perfect system.
No perfect system.
Fits that. And it's a nova that went off in M31 in 2008. It's called M31 N2008-12A. It was discovered by a couple of Japanese amateur astronomers, actually.
Yeah.
We followed up on that. It turns out it has a recurrence time of just 1 year. It erupts every year. And I think we're now up to like 13 eruptions or something like that. Since the first one, every single one has been measured. And this presented a challenge for the theorists at first, because they didn't think that it was possible to get a nova to actually go off once a year. Turns out you can do it if the white dwarf is right up against the Chandrasekhar limit, and if the accretion rate is 10 to the -7 or so solar mass a year, very high for novae.
Yeah.
So a high M dot, high white dwarf mass. Well, if that white dwarf is a carbon oxygen white dwarf, it's going to deflagrate when it goes over, and we're going to have a type 1a supernova in all likelihood. On the other hand, if
that would be awesome.
Oxygen neon, maybe it'll implode.
That would be awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Bright future.
So one of the things we're doing now is we're seeing how common these things are. Surveys are, the ZTF, Zwicky survey, and of course LSST will contribute to that. Those kind of high cadence synoptic surveys are going to revolutionize the field observationally. Indeed.
Very cool. So as long as we're going non-linear here, let's go back.
Okay.
And what was your very first AAS journal article? AJ, APJ, letter, supplement?
Okay. Well, at UCLA,
start with a supplement.
at UCLA back in the day, before they merged with the physics department. So back then it was just an astronomy program. They had an interesting way of doing their courses. So UCLA is on the quarter system. I believe they still are. So there's a fall quarter, then Christmas break, and then winter and spring. And then we didn't really do much in the summer, but there was technically a summer quarter. So starting in your first year in the winter quarter, you would take 3 what were referred to as core classes. There were 6 total that you had to take, but in your first year you take 3 in a quarter, and they were called the A courses. So I don't remember what they all were, but like stellar evolution, stellar atmospheres, and extragalactic or something like that were 3 of them. And you would take those A courses, and that would be kind of an introduction to that field. And then in the spring quarter, you would narrow down those 3 to 2 classes, 2 of those 3 that you really liked, and you would take the B course. So you only take 2 courses, and they would be distilled down from those 3. And then in the following fall quarter, you would take the C class, and the C class was a research class. You would just do a research project and a paper on one of those topics from those 2 B courses. And so I did my first paper as a C project at UCLA, and I was working with Bruce Margon, and Jonathan Katz, and Richard Harms, and we studied Cygnus X-1 actually, and which was kind of cool for a grad student first paper.
Cyg X-1.
It was like the black hole, stellar mass black hole binary system. And so the project involved, there was data that already existed. I didn't get it. It was high resolution spectroscopy. And the idea was to study those spectra, to phase them up, and to look for any evidence of a lower mass B star component to Cyg X-1 that would that would be part of a triple system with a neutron star that would enable you to avoid the black hole. So you'd have the O9's, giant star, the primary, and then instead of a black hole as a secondary, you'd have a tight binary consisting of a lower luminosity B star and a neutron star. And neutron star was providing the X-rays, but yet it had enough mass along with the B star to satisfy the mass function for the overall orbit.
Right.
So anyway, we looked for that. Didn't find any evidence for that, luckily.
No.
That B star.
That would have upset the apple cart.
But, we tried to just put another nail in the coffin of that devil's advocate model of a triple system. So that was my first paper.
Very cool. Was that AJ?
AppJ.
AppJ. Very cool. Very cool.
And then the next year, I did another C project. This one was very different. It was on, I think it was interstellar medium class, and I worked with Mike Jura. And we wrote a paper on circular polarization from scattering by circumstellar grains or something like that.
Okay.
It was like a phenomenological / theoretical project. And so for a time, I actually, thought about working on something like that with Mike, but he very gingerly kind of talked me out of that and said, you really should do more observation and less theory. I guess he didn't think I was quite up to that, which was, at the time I felt a little bad, but looking back, it was great. He did me a favor. I would not have prospered in that field, I don't think. And it's good for faculty to give students guidance like that, to sort of, not so much worry about, hurting their feelings or diminishing their self-esteem, but steering them in a direction where they're going to be successful.
They have
to do that, and I'm grateful to him for that.
Balance.
Yeah.
I did one observing project once. I went up to Lick, and it was, and just harking back to Bob, it was one of Bob Kraft's postdocs, and so we were going up and taking a look at the Pleiades, and we were looking at Pleiades memberships. It went fine, but I very quickly ascertained all by myself that this was my cup of tea. I appreciate it. I love it. I like my theory to lie very closely to observations, but I could tell just from that one experience, okay, I've got too many extra bolts laying around here. This is good. So, but so I appreciate your point, right? That usually people will have a strength, a talent, and so guiding them to where that talent or strength is a positive thing. Yeah. Boy, we're going nonlinear today. So as you go forward, what is your history with the AAS Journal since your first 2 papers there?
Well, I've continued to publish mainly in AAS journals, and I guess my first experience with journals kind of behind the scenes was about 20 years ago. I spent some time on the pub board for PASP.
Okay.
And Callie asked me to do that because I spent a lot. I was one of her go-to referees, I guess, back then, and so I ended up on the pub board there. It wasn't as active later on. Maybe I forget the exact year, 2013 or something like that. I joined the AAS publications board.
I didn't know that.
Again, associated with Anne. She was, I think, a chair of the pub board at that point. So I spent a couple years there. I really kind of got into it. One of the things I really pushed when I was there was the research notes, which was a nascent idea at that point. So I championed that and tried to push that through as much as I could.
Well, that became reality.
It happened. So yeah. So when I was on the pub board back in 2015, 2016, I found out, I guess through Ethan, that there was an opening for an SE for the Stars and Stellar Physics Corridor. And so I applied for that. I thought that would be something that sort of fit my expertise. I've been working in the field for quite a while, and I did have the experience with the pub board, so I thought that was a good qualification for doing that. So I think I joined back in 2016.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool. So you're a veteran.
And time has flown since then.
5-6 years. So on average, as a scientific editor, on average, roughly how many submissions per week, new submissions per week do you get?
It's quite variable. I would say on average, 3 to 4, something like that.
Yep. Yep. And then of course they all are in various states and stages depending on the process. And so 3 to 4, maybe you have 50 in steady state in some stage.
Yeah, right. Maybe 40 or so that are in some stage. That's right.
So when a manuscript comes in and you take a look at it, what do you think makes for a good, solid initial submission?
Well, I think one of the most important things, and I guess this was instilled in me, going way back when I was in grad school, is the introduction. I think it's really important. I've noticed that when I write papers, sometimes I write the introduction sort of near the end or whatever. It's something you really need to have the whole picture of the paper, and you really need the introduction to focus the reader on what you're going to be talking about. You need to cover the background well. You need to have the appropriate references to kind of set the stage for previous work. Yep. And then you need to outline, what you're going to do in this particular paper and how, this is an important part, how what you're doing is significant to the field and is going to, it doesn't have to be your shaking, but it has to move the ball down the field, right? You have to say how this brick fits into the edifice of what you're trying to do in this field. So I think that's an important thing to have that introduction there. And then, following from that, it's important that the paper doesn't take on a life of its own after that, and you start adding all kinds of other things that are sort of peripheral to what it is you're really trying to cover in the paper. Sometimes there are papers that come through where you really think this should be 2 or 3 papers, not one paper.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yep. Yeah, intros are important. So then you send it out for a review and it goes to a referee. And so I want to take a look at it from two viewpoints.
Mhm.
So do you have any tips you would like to share for authors during the review process?
So, well, aside from, you know, sort of preparation of the manuscript for the authors, I think that they need to, at least in recent times, be a little bit patient. I mean, we try to push for the 3-week review. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we would like to find an appropriate reviewer. Sometimes now with all the COVID problems going on, that's really kind of caused some delays for some people. Other people have found it to, you know, maybe expedite their reviews because they're kind of locked down and they can focus on something. So it works both ways. It depends on the particular reviewer, but there's a lot of dispersion in that. So I would say for the authors, you know, you be a little bit patient. The other thing is, if you're going to suggest reviewers, which you can do, it's important to try to pick someone that you think would be appropriate, obviously, but also somebody that you haven't really worked closely with in the past, because we want to avoid, you know, conflicts of interest and so on. And so, you know, sometimes if I haven't done my job properly and checked these people too much, and I send it out, and one of the people that the author has recommended writes back and says, I can't do this, it's a conflict of interest, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really reflect that well back on the author. So I think, you know, while it's fine to use that option, really try to think about it a bit and pick somebody that's appropriate to list, or a couple people, but avoid close collaborators in that sense, I would say.
Right. It's the family and friends plan.
Right.
Very good. Okay. How about on the other side of the game? What do you have tips or guidance you want to give on referees during the peer review process? Sure.
So for referees, first of all, you know, we owe them a debt of gratitude for all the work that they do, because it's not easy to review a paper when you've got other things going on. It takes a lot of time, and most of our reviewers do a great job. So first of all, thank you. The other thing that I would say is, if you get a refereeing request, the important thing, at least from my perspective as an SE, is that what I really want is, if you can do it, is get back a response as quickly as possible. It doesn't have to be yes. You can say no. No is okay. I'd much rather have no than silence, than crickets. Because I don't want to keep pestering that particular potential referee. And it's fine if they're busy or they can't do it, but let me know as soon as possible so I can go on to another possibility. Or, you know, you can also feel free to suggest people in your stead if you can't do it. And that's always helpful too. Yeah. So I would say, you know, that's something that I would recommend for referees in the initial process. In terms of refereeing the paper, I think that you need to, as a referee, look at the paper with two kinds of metrics that you're going to evaluate it by. One is, does this paper meet this bar that it's suitable for publication? There are no obvious errors, there are no problems that you see, and so on. So it's suitable for publication. Then the other metric is, okay, these are some suggestions that would make the paper better, and I strongly suggest that you follow these, and so on. But sometimes referees try to make the paper that they would write themselves.
Yes.
Right? And you need to recognize as a referee that at some point it's the author's paper, and that they're going to have their own style, they're going to have their own way of doing things. And it's important to kind of let go when the paper is okay and suitable for publication, and not act as though you are an active co-author on the paper and keep pushing to get it to your idea of perfection.
Very good. Yes. That's all I'll say is yes. let's wrap up here. So is there anything else that you would like to share about the editorial peer review as practiced by the AAS journals and their community?
Well, I think I've covered quite a bit of it. I just want to emphasize again that, you know, our profession really relies heavily on the peer review process. It's incredibly important, and we all need to contribute to that. Can't just write papers. We have to agree from time to time to referee papers, and we have to be on both sides of that coin. It's very important for people to realize that. Sometimes people, I think, get to a certain station in their career where they're, you know, very prominent in their field. They're spending lots of time. They're doing great work and so on. And they just feel like refereeing may be beneath them at some point at that point in their career. And it's really, you know, if you're going to be publishing papers, and you have 3 or 4 papers a year or whatever going in the AppJ, you are drawing on the resources of the community to review those papers. And I think people need to make time to do that, at least occasionally, to sort of help on the other end. Because again, the refereeing process is important, and 99.9% of the referees do a great job. I'm really amazed about that. I mean, I see the reports coming in, and it's clear that in most cases, in almost all cases, the referees are really trying to help the author. They're not trying to bash them or to, you know, to diss their work. They're trying to help them make the paper really good, and it's in some sense a thankless job, but I just want to say right here and now, we all thank you for
Definitely
doing that.
Yep, I thank you. Yeah, I mean, in general, the process as practiced by the community is to improve a paper and bring it to publication,
Right.
As opposed to there are certain publications where the name of the game is to tear it down.
Right.
So here it's really it should be viewed as a constructive process when it goes through. So yeah, agreed. Awesome. Alan, I think your fire is in need of attention back there. I've been watching it.
It's calming down.
It's a recurrent fire. There we go. Let's be nerdy.
The fire is telling us it's time to wind down.
Very cool. So Alan, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today and talking about your scientific, about you and your research and your scientific editor activities.
It's been a pleasure, Frank.
All righty. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.